So guys, now we will going to start with the implementation of thread pool. So now we will going to implement all the 7 steps that you can see on the screen. In fact, we will first implement the step from 1 to 6, and the step number 7 we have left out. We will implement it later. So at this point of time, our objective is to implement this particular API, that is thread pool dispatch thread, right? It is this API that we will going to implement all the 7 steps in this API. Now, if you see the prototype or signature of this API accepts 3 arguments. The first argument is a pointer to the thread pool. The second argument is a pointer to the function, and this function represents the work which application wants to do using thread pools, right? So the pointer to this thread function has to be provided by the application at the time of invoking this API. And the function needs to operate on some data. So the third argument is actually a pointer to the memory, which stores the application specific data to be operated by this thread function, right? So we already know the action to be done, that is the action is represented by this thread function, and we already know the data on which the thread function has to be operated on, right? That is the third argument. Now that at this point of time we clearly have an idea and the objective that we need to accomplish, I would suggest that you try it yourself. Try to provide the implementation of this function which meets all the requirement. That is, you should clearly implement the steps from 1 to 7 or maybe up to step number 6. Anyway, I will going to discuss the implementation of all these steps step by step. So as a first step to implement this API, we first need to implement these 2 helper APIs, right? The first API says thread pool thread stage 3 function. So as you can see that this API does the stage 3 work, right? So if you go back, you can see that this is the stage 3, and stage 3 is all about performing the step number 6 and step number 7. So step number 7 we will do later. So stage number 3 is all about executing the step number 6, and the step number 6 says park the thread T1 back to the pool, right? So it simply means that the first API, that is thread pool thread stage 3 function, is all about parking the thread back to the pool. That's it. So basically we need to implement an algorithm which is divided into 2 steps. The first step is to add the thread object to the thread pool, and the second step is simply to block the current thread on its condition variable, right? If we perform the step number 1 and 2, we ultimately achieves parking a thread in the thread pool, right? So to implement the API number 1, that is thread pool thread stage 3 function, what I will going to do is that I will first lock the mutex, because as I said, any addition of the thread or removal of the thread from the thread pool has to be done in a mutually exclusive way. And you can see that the second argument to this API is the thread itself. So all I need to do is to insert this thread object into the thread pool. And we already know that our thread pool is nothing but it is a linked list. So we can simply insert a given thread into the thread pool using the API glthread@next. And the second thing that we need to do is to block the current thread on its condition variable, right? And simply unlock the mutex, and this completes the implementation of this API. So this API represents the step number 6, that is parking the thread in the thread pool, right? All this API is all about to insert this thread into a thread pool and then make this thread block, right? Then coming to the second API is all about starting the execution of the thread which is passed as an argument to this API, that is thread pool run thread, right? So this API assumes that this particular thread has already been removed from the thread pool, and the next thing that we need to do is to kickstart this thread again. So this API actually implements the algorithm which is split up into 2 parts. The first part says that if the execution unit of this thread object is not yet created, then create it, right? Here execution unit means invocation of pthread create API on this thread object, right? And the second part of the algorithm says that if the execution unit of the thread is already created, it means that the thread has been blocked on a condition variable. In that case, we will only signal the thread on its condition variable so that the thread resumes its execution, right? So this API makes sense because when we run the thread, it simply means that either we are running the thread for the first time, it means that the execution unit of that thread has not been created, or we are running the thread nth number of time because we have fetched the thread from the thread pool and that particular thread has serviced the application n number of times already. So it simply means that that thread must be blocking on its condition variable, and this API would simply signal the condition variable of that thread, right? So to discuss the implementation of this API, you can see that we have assumed that this thread has already been removed from the thread pool, right? So that's why we have an assert check here. This assert check ensures that this thread must not be present in a thread pool. And the second thing that I will do is to test the flag thread created. If this flag is set to false, it simply means that I have not even created the execution unit of this thread. In that case, I would simply invoke an API run thread, which will take care to create the execution unit for this thread object and file the thread with this thread function and with this thread argument, right? We will see how we will supply these parameters through this thread object before invoking this API. And in other case, in the else part, we simply have to signal the condition variable of the thread. And this completes the implementation of this API, right? So with this, we complete the implementation of these two helper APIs. And now proceeding further, we will start with the implementation of our main API, that is thread pool dispatch thread. And we will see how we can kickstart with the step number 1, then step number 2, 3, and along the way how we perform the step number 4, 5, 6, and 7, right?